10th. For some days past, the Emperor has been reading works on war, fortifications, artillery. He has examined Vauban, an account of the campaigns during the Revolution, Gassendi's dictionary, and Guibert's tactics, with all of which he is much pleased. These subjects have led him to speak of several generals who have already been frequently noticed in the course of this journal. They could only carry on war on great roads, said he, and within range of cannon when their field of battle should have extended over a whole country. During dinner he spoke of the campaign of Du Maurier in Champagne, which he had just been reading. He thought little of the Duke of Brunswick, who, with a plan of offensive operations, had advanced only 18 leagues in 40 days. But on the other hand, he very much blamed Dumouriez, whose position, he said, was far too hazardous. For me, this is saying a great deal, added he, for I consider myself to have been the most venturesome man in a war that perhaps ever lived. Yet I should certainly have been afraid to keep the position that Dumouriez retained. So numerous were the dangers it presented. I could only explain his maneuver on the supposition that he could not venture to retire. He would probably have encountered greater risks in retreating than in staying where he was. Wellington was placed in the same situation Waterloo. The French are the bravest troops in the world. They will fight in whatever position they may be attacked, but they cannot retreat before a victorious enemy. If they experience the least check, they lose all presence of mind and discipline. They slip through your fingers, as it were. Dumouriez, I suppose, calculated on this, or perhaps he might have been influenced by some secret negotiation of which we are ignorant. The newspapers which we peruse today mention the marriage of Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg to Princess Charlotte of Wales. Prince Leopold, said the Emperor, once had a chance of becoming my aide-de-camp. He solicited the appointment, and I don't know what prevented his obtaining it. However, it was lucky for him that his application proved unsuccessful. Had it been otherwise, his present marriage would never have taken place. Who could pretend to say what is fortunate or unfortunate in the events of a human life? Prince Charlotte of Wales next became the subject of conversation. Someone observed that she was exceedingly popular in England, and that she had given many unequivocal proofs of energy of character. The English were of opinion that she would be another Elizabeth, and she herself seemed to cherish that idea. The individual who made these remarks said that he happened to be in London in 1814, at the time when the young princess, indignant at the ill treatment of her mother, escaped from the Prince Regent's palace, and stepping into the first hackney coach she met within the street, drove to the residence of her mother, to whom she was fondly attached. On this occasion, the natural severity of the English relaxed into indulgence, and all were inclined to impart the breach of decorum in consideration of the amiable sentiment that had occasioned it. The young princess would not leave her mother until the Duke of York, or another of her uncles, as it was said, the Lord Chancellor, prevailed on her to go back to her father's palace by assuring her that to persist in the course she had adopted would endanger her mother's happiness, perhaps even her life. Princess Charlotte had already given a proof of decision of character in refusing to marry the Prince of Orange. Her reason for rejecting this alliance was that it would have obliged her occasionally to reside out of England, and this truly national sentiment contributed to render her the more dear to the English people. The English who are at St. Helena assure us that her union with the Prince of Saxe-Coburg was perfectly in unison with her own wishes, and that she publicly declared she looked forward to happiness because in her choice she had been guided purely by sentiment. She was said to be much attached to Prince Leopold. I readily believe it, said the Emperor. I recollect him very well. When he appeared at the Tuileries, I thought him one of the handsomest young men I ever saw. Within these few days, the English who are here have related an incident which they regard as a proof of high spirit and dignity of feeling on the part of their future queen. Previously to her marriage, one of the ministers waited upon her for the purpose of settling some domestic details, and having submitted to her some suppositions which she did not conceive to be sufficiently liberal. My lord, said she, I am heiress to the throne of Great Britain, and my mind has risen to a level which the exalted station I am destined to fill. Therefore I must be provided for accordingly. Do not imagine that in marrying Prince Leopold I ever can or will sink to the rank of Mistress Coburg, entertain no such idea, I beg of you. The young princess is the idol of the English people, who look forward to her reign as affording the prospect of future happiness. The emperor, again alluding to Prince Leopold and the chance he had of becoming his aide-de-camp, said, a crowd of German princes solicited the same favor. When I established the Confederation of the Rhine, the sovereigns who were included in it took it for granted that I intended to revive in my person the etiquette and forms of the Holy Roman Empire, and even the kings themselves are eager to join my retinue. One wished to be appointed my cupbearer, another my grand butler. At this period, the princes of Germany literally invaded the Tuileries. They crowded the saloons and modestly mingled with the officers of my household. It was the same with the Italians, Spaniards, and Portuguese. In short, all the most exalted individuals in Europe were assembled at the Tuileries. The fact is, added the emperor, that during my reign, Paris was in itself a nation, and the first nation in the world. The 11th, the emperor did not leave his chamber today. I spent nearly the whole of the day with him, for I only left him to go to dinner. The conversations of the day were diffuse and interesting, for the emperor was exceedingly chatty. He discussed numerous subjects perfectly heterogeneous in their nature, though they were naturally introduced by one another. His conversation abounded with ideas and facts totally new to me, but the number and importance of the emperor's remarks rendered it impossible for me to seize them all. My eagerness to note down the past observations sometimes occasioned the present one to escape me, but for this very reason I can, with the greater confidence, vouch for the accuracy of what I have preserved. Speaking of the elements of society, the emperor said, democracy may be furious, but it has some heart. It may be moved. As to aristocracy, it's always cold and unforgiving. At another time, after some preliminary observations, he said, all human institutions present two opposite points of view. All have their advantages and disadvantages. For example, both republican and monarchical government may be defended and opposed. Doubtless, it is easy to prove in theory that both are equally good and very good, but this is not quite so easy in application. He remarked that the extreme boundary of the government of many was anarchy, and that the extreme boundary of the government of a single one was despotism. And a just medium between both was unquestionably the best, were it in the power of wisdom steadily to produce such a course. He added these truths had been repeated until they had become absolutely commonplace without producing any good result. That on this subject many volumes had been written, and many would still be written without effect. The emperor at another moment said, despotism is not absolute, but merely relative. A man cannot with impunity absorb all power within himself. If a sultan strike off the heads of his subjects according to the whim of the moment, he incurs the risk of losing his own by the same sort of caprice. Excess will always incline either to one side or the other. What the sea gains by encroachment in one direction, it loses elsewhere. When I was in Egypt, a conqueror, an absolute ruler and master, dictating laws to the people by mere orders of the day, I could not have presumed to search the houses, and it would have been out of my power to have prevented the inhabitants from speaking freely in their coffee houses, where liberty and independence prevailed even in a greater degree than in Paris. The people yielded like slaves in all other places, but they resolved to enjoy full liberty in the coffee houses, which are absolutely the citadels of freedom, the bazaars of public opinion. Here they loudly declaimed and passed judgment on the measures of the day. It would have been impossible to close their mouths. If I happened to enter these places, all bowed before me, it is true, but this is a mark of esteem to me personally. No such homage was shown to any lieutenants. Be this as it may, said he, alluding to another topic, France, when subject to the opposing influences of many, was on the point of falling beneath the blows of combined Europe, but she placed the helm in the hands of one, and immediately the first consul laid down the law to Europe, such is the power of unity and concentration. These are facts which must be convincing to the meanest understandings. It was curious to observe that the old cabinets of Europe were unable to conceive the importance of this change, and that they continued to treat with unity and concentration in the same manner as they had done with the multitude and dispersion. It is no less remarkable that the Emperor Paul, who was looked upon as a fool, was the first to appreciate this difference. While the English ministers, reputed to be so skillful and experienced, were the very last. I set aside the abstractions of your revolution, Paul wrote to me. I confine myself to a fact. In my eyes, you are a government, and I address myself to you because we can understand each other, and I can treat with you. With regard to the English ministry, I was ever obliged to conquer and force peace, and absolutely to detach England from the rest of Europe, for I could get them to listen to me. And even when they opened negotiations with me, they followed all the traces of the old routine. They tried to divert away my attention by delays, protocols, forms, ceremonies, precedents, and I know not what, but I felt myself so powerful that I could afford to laugh at all this. A new state of things required a new line of conduct, but the English ministers seemed to have no idea of the age or of the men and things belonging to it. My manner quite disconcerted them. I commenced in diplomacy, as I had already commenced in arms. These are my propositions, said I to the English ministry. We are masters of Holland and Switzerland, but I am ready to resign both in return for the restitutions that you may make to us or our allies. We are also masters of Italy, of which I will surrender up one portion and retain the other for the purpose of guaranteeing the existence of all. These are my bases. You are free to build round them as much as you please. I care not for that, but the object and result must remain as I have specified. I will not yield a hair's breadth of my determination. My object is not to purchase concessions from you, but to enter into reasonable, honorable, and lasting engagements. This is the circle I have traced out. It appears to me that you have formed no notion of our respective situations or resources. I fear not your refusal, your efforts, nor any difficulties you may throw in my way. I have a strong arm, and I only want a weight to lift it. This unusual language, continued the emperor, produced the desired effect, and the negotiations of Amiens, they had intended merely to divert us, but they now began to treat seriously. Not knowing at what point I was vulnerable, they offered to make me king of France. This is a good idea. King by the grace of foreigners, when I was already sovereign by the will of the people. Such was the ascendancy I had acquired that even while the negotiations were pending, I got myself elected president of the Italian Republic. And this circumstance, which in the ordinary course of European diplomacy would naturally have created so many obstacles, occasioned no interruption of the proceedings. Matters were brought to a conclusion, and I gained my point by plain dealing, better than if I had fallen into all the usual diplomatic subtleties. Many libelous pamphlets and manifestos of no better characters accused me of perfidy and a breach of faith in my negotiations, but I never merited these charges, which on the contrary might always have been justly applied to the other cabinets of Europe. At Amiens, I sincerely thought the fate of France in Europe and my own destiny were permanently fixed. I hoped that war was at an end. However, the English cabinet again kindled the flame. England is alone responsible for all the miseries by which Europe has since been assailed. For my part, I intended to have devoted myself wholly to the internal interests of France, and I am confident I should have wrought miracles. I should have lost nothing in the scale of glory, and I should have gained much in the scale of happiness. I should then have achieved the moral conquest of Europe, which I was afterwards on the point of accomplishing by force of arms. Of how much glory was I thus deprived! My enemies always spoke of my love of war, but was I not constantly engaged in self-defense after every victory I gained? Did I not immediately make proposals for peace? The truth is, I never was master of my own actions. I never was entirely myself. I might have conceived many plans, but I never had it in my power to execute any. I held the helm with a vigorous hand, but the fury of the waves was greater than any force I could exert in resisting them, and I prudently yielded rather than incur the risk of sinking through stubborn opposition. I never was truly my own master, but was always controlled by circumstances. Thus, at the commencement of my rise during the consulate, my sincere friends and warm partisans frequently asked me with the best intentions and as a guide for their own conduct what point I was driving at, and I always answered that I did not not know. They were surprised, probably dissatisfied, and yet I spoke the truth. Subsequently, during the Empire, when there was less familiarity, many faces seemed to put the same question to me, and I might still have given the same reply. In fact, I was not master of my actions because I was not fool enough to attempt to twist events into conformity with my system. On the contrary, I molded my system according to the unforeseen succession of events. This often appeared like unsteadiness and inconsistency, and of these faults I was sometimes unjustly accused. After alluding to some other subjects, the emperor said, one of my great plans was the rejoining, the concentration of those same geographical nations which have been disunited and parceled out by revolution and policy. There are dispersed in Europe upwards of 30 million of French, 15 million of Spaniards, 15 million of Italians, and 30 million of Germans, and it was my intention to incorporate these people each into one nation. It would have been a noble thing to have advanced into posterity with such a trade and attended by the blessings of future ages. I felt myself worthy of this glory. After this summary simplification, it would have been possible to indulge the chimera of the beau ideal of civilization. In this state of things, there would have been some chances of establishing in every country a unity of codes, principles, opinions, sentiments, views, and interests, then perhaps by the help of the universal diffusion of knowledge, one might have thought of attempting in the great European family the application of the American Congress or the Amphistians of Greece. What a perspective of power, grandeur, happiness, and prosperity would thus have appeared. The concentration of 30 or 40 millions of Frenchmen was completed and perfected, and that of 15 million of Spaniards was nearly accomplished, for nothing is more common than to convert accident into principle. Because I did not subdue the Spaniards, it will henceforth be argued that they were invincible. But the fact is that they were actually conquered. And at the very moment when they escaped me, the courts of Cadiz were secretly in treaty with me. They were not delivered either by their own resistance or by the efforts of the English, but the reverses which I sustained at distant points, and above all by the error I committed in transferring my whole forces to the distance of 1,000 leagues from them. Had it not been for this, the Spanish government would shortly have been consolidated. The public mind would have been tranquilized, and hostile parties would have rallied together. 3 or 4 years would have restored the Spaniards to profound peace and brilliant prosperity. They would have become a compact nation, and I should well have deserved their gratitude, for I should have saved them from the tyranny by which they are now oppressed and the terrible agitations that await them. With regard to the 15 millions of Italians, their concentration was already far advanced. It only wanted maturity. The people were daily becoming more firmly established in the unity of principles and legislation, and also in the unity of thought and feeling, that certain and infallible cement of human concentration. The union of Piedmont to France and the junction of Parma, Tuscany, and Rome were, in my mind, only temporary measures, intended merely to guarantee and promote the national education of the Italians. You may judge the correctness of my views and of the influence of common laws. The portions of Italy that were united to France, though that union might have been regarded as the insult of invasion on our part, were, in spite of their Italian patriotism, the very places that continued most attached to us. Now that they are restored to themselves, they conceive that they have been invaded and disinherited. And so they certainly have been. All the south of Europe, therefore, would soon have been rendered compact in point of locality, views, opinions, sentiments, and interests. In this state of things, what would have been the weight of all the nations of the North? What human efforts could have broken through so strong a barrier? The concentration of the Germans must have been effected more gradually, and therefore I had no more than simplify their monstrous complication. Not that they were unprepared for centralization. On the contrary, they were too well prepared for it, and they might have blindly risen in reaction against us before they had comprehending our designs. How happens it that no German prince has yet formed a just notion of the spirit of his nation and turned it to good account? Certainly, if heaven had made me a prince of Germany amidst the many critical events of our time, I should infallibly have governed the 30 million of Germans combined. And from what I know of them, I think I may venture to affirm that if they had once elected and proclaimed me, they would not have forsaken me, and I should never have been at St. Helena. Then, after some melancholy details and comparisons, resuming the previous subject, he said, "At all events, this concentration will be brought about sooner or later by the force of events. The impulse is given, and I think that since my fall and the destruction of my system, no grand equilibrium can possibly be established in Europe, except by the concentration and confederation of the principal nations. That sovereign who, in the first great conflict, shall sincerely embrace the cause of the people, will find himself at the head of all Europe and may attempt whatever he pleases. It will perhaps be asked why I did not suffer these ideas to transpire, why I did not submit them to public discussion, since they would doubtless have become popular, and popularity would have been an immense reinforcement to me. My answer is that malevolence is ever more active than good intention, that at the present day the power of wit overrules good sense and obscures the clearest voice it will, and that to have submitted these important subjects to public discussion would have been to consign them to the mercy of party, spirit, passion, intrigue, and gossiping, while the infallible result would have been discredit and opposition. I conceive, therefore, that secrecy was the most advisable course. I surrounded myself with that halo of mystery which pleases and interests the multitude, gives birth to speculations which occupy the public mind, and finally affords opportunities to those sudden and brilliant disclosures which exercise such important influence. It was this very principle that accelerated my unfortunate march to Moscow. Had I been more deliberate, I might have averted every evil, but I could not delay and afford time for comment. With my career already traced out, with my ideas formed for the future, it was necessary that my movement and my success should seem as it were supernatural. The emperor here averted to the Russian expedition, repeating many of the observations which I have already recorded elsewhere. I now no doubt only what I conceive to be new